Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Academy Show. I'm your host, Mo Stewart, and I'm joined once again by Matt Addison. Now, there may not be a lot of games for the youth teams at this stage of the season, but just like everywhere else in the world of Liverpool Football Club, there's been a lot going on. We've had new signings, we've had big games, we've had transfer rumours as well. So Matt and I are going to be going through all of that. But as an extra treat for you this week, we've got a special guest coming up. The new signing I mentioned, Ben Doak, comes from Celtic, and we've managed to get a Celtic reporter, Owen Brown, to come on to tell us all about him. But Matt, it's exciting times for these young lads. Like I said, this feel-good factor is running all the way through the club.
Yeah, absolutely. And the new recruits is something that we see every season, if we're being honest. Obviously, there's a different sort of theme this season with it being lots of British players, because obviously we've spoken about the Brexit regulations and all of that kind of thing in the past. But yeah, exciting times, and looking forward to getting some insight into him, because I'm sure, like myself, not many of the listeners and viewers will know much, if anything, about him, and be interesting to kind of see what kind of a player we can expect.
Well, having spoke to him, I'm already excited, and I know the rest of you will be. So I won't waste too much time before we get back into that. But you mentioned Brexit regulations, and they kind of come into play with the other player that we're going to be discussing today, Northern Irishman Trent Doherty, who we look to have made a deal for next season. So we'll be discussing him later in the show. And of course, we'll be going through the recent results. Any of you who watched the last show will know that we were looking at the UEFA Youth League quarterfinal against Juventus. So we'll let you know how that got on. And there was a cameo from one of our first team stars for the under-23s recently. So we'll be talking about that. And obviously, Matt has his one to watch. But without further ado, let us get straight into it. My interview with Owen Brown of the Celtic Way, all about our brand new superstar from Scotland, Ben Doak. I am delighted to be joined right now by Owen Brown, Celtic reporter on the Celtic Way, the Young Team podcast of Young Scots. There's surely much more things that you're doing. Do you want to let us know everything in case I leave anything out?
I think that's a good kind of summation, Mo. I do a bit of writing on Celtic for a website called the Celtic Way, using stats from StatsBomb, really good data analytics. And as you mentioned, I also keep a keen eye on young Scottish players with the Young Team newsletter. Those are the two kind of things I'm most proud of at the moment. Thanks.
So you will be chock full of Ben Doak on both of those scores then. So you are the perfect person to speak to about our new Scottish wonder. Now, some people will have heard a lot about him through reports, would have seen that it's a big coup for Liverpool to get a player of this stature, but they won't know necessarily a lot about the player himself. So what kind of player have we got on our books now? It's been reported that he's played like fullback, he's played winger, but then he's also scoring hat-tricks for Scotland under-17s. So, I mean, fill us in a little bit more about Ben Doak, the player.
Yeah, absolutely, Mo. Well, an attacker, really. So plays right wing at the moment, really, for both Celtic and Scotland. I think he's the type of player that would be ultimately potentially capable of playing across the front line, which I know is something that Liverpool, value for the first team, and certainly from my understanding for the academy as well. But generally, for Celtic, he would play as a right winger. They use a 4-3-3 system. The kind of principles of Ange Postecoglou have been filtered down throughout the Celtic B team and the youth team. So he'd be the right-sided winger in that kind of setup. They use a system, a kind of modern one, maybe similar to Liverpool, in that, two centre-backs, the kind of full-backs, for them, push into the middle rather than kind of wide. And then there's, kind of one midfielder that keeps at the base with those three, and then five kind of with freedom to attack. But the wingers stay very wide, try and isolate the fullback. So that's the kind of role that Doak has for them. And similarly for Scotland, he might play as a wide right in a 4-2-3-1. Recently, they started a game in a 5-3-2, and he played as the right-sided forward up front. But basically an attacker. I don't think that he'll end up as a fullback at all. If you've seen that Wikipedia or whatever, I would disregard that information. His attributes are basically all geared up for attacking. So pace is the main thing you'll notice about him. Exceptional acceleration, but also really good top speed and stamina. His size is kind of intriguing because he's not tall. He's kind of stocky, but he has a strong upper half. So he's pretty good at receiving the ball with his back to goal. and shielding and turning a defender. He's also pretty good at riding the sort of rough challenges that we maybe get up here in the north of the UK. So he's pretty robust for a winger. He's not the kind of shy and retiring kind of tricksy type guy. And finally, I would say the other kind of main asset is his directness. So he always wants to go direct towards goal and impact the game. He dribbles a lot, but his dribbles tend to be based off acceleration and anticipation. I would say more efficiency than tricky. And I think that maybe, again, kind of fits into Liverpool's style in that, it's with an output, it's with a purpose, what he does. And that's about, getting through balls, getting shots off inside the box, things like that. Yeah.
See, these are all things that will be music to Liverpool fans' ears. You are building the identity of exactly the kind of player we hope to cut in. Now, is there a current player out there who you could compare him to? Obviously, he's still a very young man, but just in terms of stylistically, can you tell who he's been watching most on YouTube when he's been growing up?
Well, I mean, if you want music to your ears as Liverpool fans, this is one where I don't want to be creating too many kind of unrealistic headlines, but it's Mo Salah, really, for me. Looking at the kind of the stature, the kind of physique where he has this kind of upper body strength to be able to shrug off defenders, not the kind of superhuman muscular build quite yet that Salah has, and obviously not the level of acceleration and trickery and eye for goal, but there are similarities there in terms of physique and style on the ball and the things he wants to do on the pitch. So that's the person I would maybe say is most similar. And I hope he can reach that kind of height rather than the other one that I would maybe say from a Liverpool perspective is maybe Shaqiri, another person that physically is a little bit of a match and kind of stylistically. So those would be two to maybe consider, I guess.
Well, obviously, we know he's a young man, but yeah, that is a very exciting prospect, particularly considering he's going to have the chance to learn at the feet of the master for quite some time as well. So he's had some first team experience for Celtic. I believe he's had 2 senior appearances, but once it became clear that he wasn't looking to sign a new deal at Celtic, he kind of was moved back to the youth team. Understandable from Ante Postecoglou, sorry. Are Celtic disappointed to see him go so soon? I mean, I understand to a certain extent that when clubs with the bigger clubs from the Champions League come calling, it's hard to hold on to them. But they would have been hoping to get a little bit more time with him, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be a disappointment. And I think this is part of maybe a bigger picture for Celtic, Mo. So in recent years, Celtic have lost Barry Hepburn, similar sort of role played by him as Ben Doak to Bayern Munich, and also Liam Morrison, a centre-back, went at the same time to Bayern Munich. Josh Adam, a young attacking playmaker, went to Manchester City relatively recently as well. And when Brendan Rodgers, obviously familiar to you all as Liverpool fans, left Celtic to go to Leicester City, I think as well as that being a blow, there was a concern that maybe some of the youth team products might be tempted to go down there too. So it's part of a kind of bigger picture. And I think that there's not exactly been an exodus of talent, and you have to be kind of mindful of the fact to Celtic that you operate, as you said, in a world where there's going to be appeal from clubs that are bigger than you financially and Champions League and so on. But I think it's still got to be a concern. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword at the moment as well for Celtic, because they've had this quirk this season where their B team, which is an under-21 team, has been playing in the 5th tier of Scottish football, so against adults. And maybe that's been good for player development, but also maybe it means that there's more eyes on those players. So maybe, scouts are more ready to pick things off. So these are all kind of quirky things to consider. And then the further disappointment, I guess, is that this is a type of club, and I guess it's similar to Liverpool in a way, although Liverpool operating at a higher level now, where there's a desire to have 1 or 2 local kids in the team, that make it to the first team. Of course, famously, Celtic won the European Cup, the Libsam Lions, with no players from out with a 30-mile radius of Celtic Park in their team, and that's the sort of mythology that still persists within the club. And I think that means that the club can be sanguine and realistic about this. The fans will be pretty disappointed.
I think you're right though to mention that kind of identity with the youth team, because I do believe that's one of the reasons why Ben Doak chose Liverpool, because there were more lucrative offers from elsewhere. But if there's one thing you can say about Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool, there is definitely a pathway from the youth team into the senior side, and Ben Doak believes that he will be the next one on that rank.
Yeah, Mo. I think from Jurgen Klopp's ability to find pathways into the first team, and also I think these things are now, well, they seem, for me at least, to be structural at Liverpool. The quality of coaching at every level, the plans they'll have laid out for him, the existence of all sorts of support to enable him to basically become the best version of himself possible. So I think that combination of it being a kind of analytical super club, but also maybe in the fact that it's a city that's somewhat comparable to Glasgow. The club has historical footballing links to Scotland. These will all have been factors. And I think from my understanding of Doak, and my limited interactions with his family, is that, this is a grounded and nice family. They have footballing history. So Doak's grandfather, Martin, was a footballer as well, but he played at a lower level. So he was a pro, but he played for Greenock Morton in Scotland in 2 spells, punctuated by a season in Australia. So maybe the reality of that and having experience at a lower level than Celtic and certainly Liverpool means there's a bit of family knowledge about the kind of the weight on his shoulders in terms of making it, and what he can gain from being at Liverpool. And yeah, I think you're right in terms of pointing to the fact that the prospect and the type of club he's landing at, and the idea of Klopp and the pathway to first team minutes has to be a positive for him.
Well, I can guarantee you that he's probably already met Kenny Dalglish by now, and very much welcomed into the former Celtic Man family. Okay, so final question. Just in trying to get an idea of a gauge of where he lies within recent Celtic academy graduates. You mentioned Ben Hepburn there, but I'm thinking obviously Liverpool fans be more aware of the likes of James Forrest and Kieran Tierney, who obviously spent more time at Celtic, but then have since developed into top players. Do you think he has a potential to be in and amongst that level, do you think?
Yeah, I think his ceiling is really, really high. There's lots of really good signs with Doak. From the things that we've seen on the pitch recently, I was at the Scotland under-17 Euro qualification game against Czech Republic recently, and he absolutely willed Scotland over the line. His skills and his personality are all there to kind of make it. It's very difficult to judge. There's obviously examples like Tierney, who's gone on to good things, and Forrest. But even in those, James Forrest, for example, had a stellar youth career and debuted for Celtic, 12 years ago almost. However, you might argue he didn't really make an impact in a massive way on the first team until his mid-20s. And then there's the kind of cautionary tales of people like Karamoko Dembele, whose career has kind of stalled at Celtic a little bit, partially due to injury, but also just maybe his size not filling out in the way people hoped. So it's tough to judge, right? But I do think that Ben Doak has all the physical attributes, and seems like in terms of personality, leadership, he's a very kind of, to use a Scottish word, gallus. So gallus kind of has a meaning that you're bold, but in a merited and kind of cheekily expressed way of being self-confident. He has that kind of leadership and self-belief. And I think that, if there are many good prospects in Celtic's academy at the moment, but he's one that I can see as being a real good stylistic fit for Liverpool. And I think as much as this is disappointing for the club and fans at this end, it's a move that kind of makes sense.
Wow. As I said, that is all music to Liverpool fans' ears. I think we've found ourselves a little gem here. Owen, thank you for giving us the lowdown on it. And once again, apologies to the Celtic family for stealing such a talent from you.
There's more in the pipeline.
A big thank you to Owen there for giving us all a lot of insight into what we can expect, and hopefully not putting too much pressure on the young boy's shoulders, but I think we're all going to be certainly paying attention when he first puts on the red shirt. Now, Matt, let's come on to the other guy we mentioned at the top of the show, Trent Doherty. Liverpool looked to have stolen a march on, amongst other teams, Celtic, but also both sides of Manchester, who were looking at this boy. He's clearly highly rated. Looks like he plays more on the left side compared to Ben Doak, who's more of a right-sided player. What else do we know about him?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Obviously, a double-barrel surname, and his first name is Trent, so no pressure there. But yeah, I think the plan will be to get a few of these kids in. I think we've seen it over the last few seasons. We've seen sort of different players come in. it's kind of at the similar kind of stage, I would say, to Stefan Bajcetic that we've spoken about in the past, where obviously he came in from Spain just before the Brexit deadline, but it's kind of a similar sort of age. He's only 15, Trent, so it's probably one of those where you could see him having a good few months, maybe with the under 16s, and then taking that step up. But having said that, having seen a little bit of him. Obviously, just researching him, given that Liverpool seem to have signed him, like you say, tends to play off the left-hand side. But I think it's fair to say he's probably one of those that falls into that versatile category of probably him, Ben Doak. You look at someone like Kate Gordon, Musilovski. There's kind of this group of players now, isn't there, that we've spoken about in the past, where, okay, he probably mainly will play off the left, but he can play in other positions as well. And obviously, that's something that Liverpool are very keen on. I think probably for two reasons. One is that it gives them probably the most opportunities to get into the first team, in terms of if you can play more than one position, obviously that's more chances. But also you look at the attackers that Liverpool have got. Obviously Salah tends to play off the right. You look at someone like Firmino, who can only play really through the middle. But generally speaking, what Liverpool look to now is someone like a Jota, or even Luis Diaz in the early period of his Liverpool career. We've seen him play on the left, we've seen him play through the middle as well. So yeah, that versatility I think is something that across all age groups Liverpool are looking at. And from the limited amount that I have seen of Trent Doherty, it kind of seems like he would probably fit into that category as well.
I mean, it does make sense from everybody's point of view. From the point of view of the club, obviously, what normally happens with the younger players, if there's maybe an early domestic cup game or maybe a few injuries, and there's players who can adapt to maybe work in different positions, then you're more likely to get elevated to the next team. But also from the player's point of view, if you can be adaptable as a young player, even if it doesn't work out for you at Liverpool, when you're going on to the next stage of your career, having that adaptability is definitely going to add a string to their bow. Yeah,
it just helps you become a rounded player, doesn't it? I mean, we're talking about relatively small sums as well here, something like 150,000 in terms of the compensation to bring him across to Liverpool. So I think for Liverpool, it makes sense in that regard as well, that probably if you keep him for a few seasons, he's either going to make it or you can sell him for a lot more than what you bought him for. So it's one of those where I think obviously you hope that one or two of these players that fell into that kind of versatile attacking player type thing, you'd hope that one or two of them make it. But even if they don't, it's no risk all round really. So yeah, it's a strategy that makes a lot of sense. I'm sure a lot of people will get very excited about these two players. Ben Doak seems to have the bigger reputation coming in, but I know obviously Trent's got a big reputation within people who've been watching him coming through in Ireland as well. So yeah, we don't want to put too much pressure on them. There's always a bit of a buzz, isn't there, when Liverpool make new signings, but I think it will be a case of being in and around Kirby for the next sort of season at least, bedding themselves in, getting used to playing at Liverpool, obviously a much bigger club than certainly what Trent has been playing in Northern Ireland for Derry City. So it'll take a bit of time to adapt. I don't think we should expect to see too much of them just yet. Don't expect to kind of see them bursting onto the scene immediately or being involved in pre-season or anything. But yeah, it'd be interesting to be able to keep an eye on them over the next few months and years, hopefully.
I think the way that our group functions at the moment at both under 18 and under 23s and even below is that once you get someone into the system and they begin to develop, that's when you can really start to make the assessment. But unlike you, I've kind of looked at a few clips on YouTube and he looks like he's got great acceleration, tenacious in the tackle, probably needs to work on his decision making, but I think you'll find that with 4 players at that age or across. But yeah, definitely something for the Liverpool to work with, that's for sure. Now, we mentioned at the top of the show and on the last show, the Liverpool were in quarter-final action in the UEFA Youth League for the under-18s, normally the under-19s for the competition. Unfortunately, Matt, it didn't go Liverpool's way. We kind of hinted that it would take a big effort to overturn the Italians on their own pitch, and it didn't quite work out that way.
Yeah, it didn't quite happen, did it? I mean, Liverpool have done well to get to this stage. I think there was a couple of injuries that are worth mentioning. Not quite sure what has stopped Kate Gordon playing for the last few weeks, but it's been a while since we've seen him. So there's obviously something not quite right with him at the moment. He's obviously been a significant miss, as you'd expect. Mateusz Musialowski as well had something minor. He's had a good few of those of late. It just seems to be he plays and then he gets injured and then he plays and then he gets injured. It just seems to be a bit of a cycle now. I know he's come back since this game and has played again, but it does seem that he just can't quite get into that rhythm really at the moment of playing games. So it was kind of a little bit of a makeshift Liverpool team. It saw Isaac Mabaya, which we've spoken about in previous shows. I think he was possibly one to watch on the last show, maybe the show before that. But what we've tended to see him doing is playing really, really well as a right back, playing well as a kind of number 6 in a midfield pivot. He ended up playing on the right-hand side of a front 3 just because there wasn't really anybody else. So it wasn't a Liverpool team that you'd want to put out there for this kind of game. I thought they did okay, actually. I thought Isaac did pretty well considering he was playing out of position. But yeah, Juventus in the end just had too much for Liverpool. And yeah, it was unfortunate. I think we've seen that a few times actually this season where there's been certain results that they just haven't had the key players on the pitch at the right time. And it's just not quite gone their way. So yeah, frustrating, but they've done well to get to that point in the competition.
Definitely. I mean, as we always say with these youth teams, the results aren't always the be-all and end-all. And when you have such mitigating circumstances to bring into it, obviously that's going to come into it. But I do think the performance, they were able to hold out a very strong Italian team. It's for an hour, then it was one of the cases where they scored twice in 5 minutes, lost the game 2-0. So very much credit to take from the game itself, the performance and the run. You hope that it's something that they can take forward into next season.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's we seem to say that a lot, don't we? It's about the development. It's about the experience. It would have been nice to have the results as well. It would have been nice, obviously, to go through to that semi-final and the final, which take place in the space of just a few days. But yeah, Liverpool will have another go at that competition next season. I think it's obviously not the biggest benefit, far from it, in terms of Liverpool getting into the Champions League, but it does have that trickle-down effect, and it obviously means that the under-19s can play in the Youth League, which we've spoken plenty about it. Harvey Elliott, who we're going to come on to in just a second, has benefited from it. There's been plenty of others that have benefited as well. So yeah, wasn't the right result, but still plenty of positives, I think, to take.
And that's the other crucial thing to remember about all this. It's not down to these boys to decide whether they not get to play in the competition next year. It's the seniors qualifying who decide who gets to play in the group stage. So yeah, they won't have to worry about this performance knocking them out or anything like that. So they'll come again, as I'm sure they will. Now, you mentioned Harvey Elliott. He was involved in the most recent under-23 game. Happened on Saturday morning, just hours before, I believe, the Liverpool took on Watford against Chelsea. We mentioned on the previous show that the under-23s had that trio of games against the top sides, Spurs, Manchester City and Chelsea. They managed to remain unbeaten through those three, Matt. So along with getting Harvey down there to kind of play alongside them, they should all be feeling pretty good about themselves as well.
Yeah, it's been a good few games, hasn't it? There's been a fair few goals at youth level. There was the 5-5 with Manchester United, which is one that sticks out. There's been some good games recently, and yeah, it's kind of at that point in the season where Liverpool don't have loads to play for. Obviously, we've spoken about the Youth League. We've spoken in previous episodes about kind of what happened in the FA Youth Cup. That didn't quite go their way. It's kind of the pressure is off now. It's more a case of individual performances, the way that the players kind of acquit themselves in these games. But yeah, it's always good to have a few decent tests back to back. And I think at youth level, it's not always the most competitive, but when you've got Manchester United, you've got Chelsea, I think there's been Manchester City in there as well recently. I think, those are the games where you get the benefits and you can really see who stands out. And yeah, I'm sure we're going to talk about Harvey, but he was certainly one of those that stood out on Saturday.
Were you surprised to see him in the team? Obviously, he himself would have been hoping to make the bench for the Watford game, but obviously Klopp had other men in mind. But with that decision being made, do you see it as a good thing that he was able to go and get some game time rather than just knocking around, sitting around behind, watching the action?
Yeah, when I saw his name was on the team sheet, I mean, it was a bit of a surprise. I think that the game in Kirkby kicked off about half an hour before the Liverpool game, so I haven't actually seen it, but was sort of keeping a track on it from a distance at the time. But yeah, it was a slight surprise, but at the same time, I wonder even whether Harvey has kind of put the idea out there. He'd quite like to go and play once he knew that he wasn't going to get on the bench for Liverpool, which I think it probably won't be the last time this season that happens, just because of the number of players that they've got. I mean, it does kind of make sense. I think he does need the minutes. I think that there's not really going to be any complaints from him. I think he's just a player that wants to play, wants to be in the thick of the action, and there could still be at senior level a big moment for him before the end of this season. We've seen him play in so many of the big games for Liverpool. You think of being thrown in against Chelsea, played his part, of course, in the Carabao Cup final as well. I mean, I think he just needed the minutes. I think that was kind of the reason for that. Obviously goes down and gets 45. That would kind of back that up. I think the fact that he came off at half time suggests it was probably the kind of premeditated idea that that's what was going to happen. Already by that point had, I think, hit the crossbar and set up one of the Liverpool goals. So obviously played pretty well, did need the minutes. It won't do him any harm in terms of his sharpness. And yeah, I think, look, Harvey Elliott isn't going to play for the under-23s most weeks, but if there was a choice between sitting in the stands at Anfield or playing in this one, I think there's a clear winner there in terms of which was most important.
And it speaks to the attitude of the boy as well. He just wants to play as much as possible. And I'm really impressed by the attitude and the maturity, because you see sometimes younger players, once they get into the first team, they don't really want to feel like they're taking any backward steps. But with Harvey, you do get the impression that he's just a boy who wants to play football and wants to learn and develop every time he's on the pitch. And considering he literally just turned 19 yesterday, happy birthday, Harvey, by the way. Again, I think it's a really good sign for the future and how he views his place in the pecking order.
Yeah, I mean, having only just turned 19, that's where he should be anyway, isn't it? I mean, he shouldn't be expecting to be in the Liverpool first team, but that's just the quality, and we know the ability that he's got. And like I say, I'm sure there'll be plenty more appearances for him at senior level to come before the end of this season. I think there's enough games to still make you think that will be the case. But yeah, I mean, listen, at one point this season, it was a surprise that he's even come back and played and looks fit again, given the injury that he had. So I think it's a case of Liverpool just doing the sensible thing. They've got so many options. He wasn't going to be needed against Watford. I'm pretty sure he'll probably be in the Champions League squad for Benfica, because obviously more subs, bigger bench and all of that kind of thing. But yeah, there's no doubt the attitude of him. Ben Doak, who works with us on Liverpool.com, spoke to someone who was there and did watch the game, and he said, he was happy and smiling and obviously delighted to be there. It wasn't really a demotion. It was just an opportunity to go and play against Chelsea, who is one of Liverpool's biggest games at that level. So yeah, I'm sure he enjoyed it. It will have been beneficial, and like I say, I would expect him to be on the bench for Liverpool against Benfica.
And a nice treat for anyone who made the effort to go down and watch the game as well. I think getting to see the young boy in the flesh. Now, let's round out the show the way we always do with your one to watch, Matt. Now, we've been through quite a few over the course of the season, but I know you've got another one up your sleeve.
I do, yeah. Partly because that's the format of the show, and partly because Callum Scanlon has been doing well. So I've gone for him. He signed his first professional contract last month. Probably a familiar name to a few people. Probably not because of how he's been playing, but more because he was one of those transfers around this time last year. He was brought in February, I think it was, signed from Birmingham City for a relatively small fee, but very much one of those players to watch out for. He, again, was one of those that I mentioned. Stefan Bajcetic was one that was signed, went into the 16s and has since moved into the 18s. I imagine that's probably what Trent Doherty will do. That's what Callum Scanlon did sort of this time last year. This season kind of moved up to the under-18s. He was on the bench for the under-19s in the UEFA Youth League. Again, I've not seen loads of him, but very highly rated. An England youth international, generally plays on the left-hand side as a kind of typical attacking Liverpool left back. So yeah, I would expect to see him become an under-18s regular, if not before the end of this season. There's not obviously loads of football left to play at that level, but certainly next season, I would imagine he'll be an under-18s player, playing pretty much every week. And yeah, from what I've seen of him, one to be excited about, and as I say, he's one of those that has been signed from another club, which is always guaranteed to get a bit of attention, a few extra sort of eyeballs on them. So yeah, Callum Scanlon, my one to watch this week.
But it shows really that the progression, the conveyor belt we've been talking about all show and all season is working in action. So if you're listening, Trent Doherty, this time 12 months from now, you might well be Matt's one to watch. And then from there, the sky is the limit. Matt, thank you as always for another fantastic show. Thank you to Owen Brown as well for joining us. And thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.